jokes about I'm going to forget to do that, and I actually forgot to record our class on Friday. So the good news was, the other class, which I was doing right after you, was the same class. So I stole their recording and uploaded it for you. So it's all sent. Yeah, it's more or less just the same bad jokes and the same order and all that kind of stuff. So we'll work on it. Okay, so today's our May 2nd edition of Accounting 605. And picking up right where we left off on Friday, just reviewing very briefly, we learned our first type of decision that we were making. And actually for this group, this has been the deja vu. You already had this, but we're just tying it all kind of in. So just quickly, we were looking at should we replace a piece of equipment. The big takeaways were I had to figure out all the information, what was relevant and what wasn't. And the big thing was in the relevance is if it didn't change between the two options, in other words, there was no difference, I don't care about it. But we were left with three things that did change. And in spite of the fact that we just bought this machine, the original machine, a year ago, we can still say that a new machine came along that frankly did enough benefit, enough savings in operating costs to basically justify buying it and throwing out the new equipment that we bought a year ago. So that doesn't mean that always happens. This isn't to say new piece of machinery comes along, do it. What the deciding point is that savings, that extra $20,000 of savings times 5 years was enough to make it worth it to do it. So there's how you end up with the correct decision in this case. This is one of the easier types of decisions at the moment. Now call this a foreshadow. After the midterm, we're going to be dealing with capital budgeting. And that's basically a fancy way of saying this, we go back to this, but we're now making bigger and longer term decisions. Literally this type of decision. It's sort of saying, like, instead of just buying one little piece of equipment and it's going to be good for a few years, are we buying a whole factory and running it for 20 years? So we're going to be doing the exact same decision, but we're going to throw in time value of money into it. This didn't take that into account. So we're going to circle back to this one after the midterm and re-examine it a little bit more in terms of some of your business decisions. Okay, normally, if I was teaching this, I would then go to look at exercise 2 in the textbook and say, let's go do exercise 2 as a practice. I know you guys were already, Greg had already gone through some of this content, so has he already done exercise 2 with you? In other words, I don't want to, if we just got an hour here, I don't want to go and do an exercise that you might have already done.
No, it's not done. Brief exercise 9.2 and 9.3 we done. And then exercise 9.3 is on homework. That's it.
Yeah, so we'll probably do tomorrow or something. Okay. It looks like, just to be on the clarity, it looks like this. A railroad, a railway that's buying a piece of equipment and it's trying to decide if it wants to do it. Is that looking familiar?
Yeah, we done.
Okay, so you've done this one.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, good. I'll skip over it then. I don't want to take a liberty if there's something I should go through, if you want me to go through. So
we done in this method.
Yeah. So if you're good with it and understanding it, I'm not going to spend time on it. We'll move into the next decision here and make sure we're caught up on it. Okay, so on that note, back to slide deck. We are now going to come into adding and dropping segments. Now, you probably covered this too. I'm just gradually sequestering into. This should be the exercise 3 type of problem. So this is the second type of decision that you're wanting to walk through here. So this is where you're deciding, like when they say segment, think of it like a product line. It's not the only way you could do it. It could be a store, it could be a product line, it could be a division. Somewhere in here, you're trying to decide, do I get rid of this division? Do I add this division? What's the impact? So, we've got a digital watch company, Lowell company here. It hasn't reported profit for several years. Income statement is right here. So, we got a bunch of sales. We've got a whole bunch of variable costs here. We do have a positive contribution margin.
Yeah.
First thing to always look for. Then we got a bunch of fixed expenses, and we got a $100,000 loss. And basically, we're trying to decide, do we get rid of this line of product? We're losing $100,000 here a year, I think it is. Do we get rid of it? So this type of decision, slightly different than the other one. You basically have to go through this line by line and say, do I save money here if I get rid of it? Yes or no? That's the simplest terms. So generally speaking, 9 out of 10 times, beware of that 10th time, because sometimes there's a trick and there's a rare exception. But in almost all cases, anything variable is saved. Very seldomly that it is not. So much so that when they're doing these types of decisions, they don't even look above this line, they just quote this. They basically say, we were given a $300,000 contribution from the sales, and that's what they plop into it. They don't even do a line by line on this. They just jump right to this and say, we will lose this revenue. Then they start going through this. This is the hard part of the question. And they start saying, do we save this information? Now, 2 things before you start going through the list. There's invariably going to be the next slide where they tell us more information. Make sure you read that before you start assuming things. Okay? So let's go take a look at that slide for a second. Okay. It says, the total fixed general factory overhead and general administrative expenses will not be affected. I'm going to talk about that in a moment here, but that's what they then said here. So let me get rid of this bullet, take it back to the main list. They were saying general factory overhead and general admin are not affected. Okay, so here's the tip to you when you're reading a question like on a test. We have an interesting conundrum problem here as instructors. You, as students, want to be able to perfectly predict what you're expected to demonstrate on a test or an exam, right? What am I expecting to see on when you answer a question, right? What am I expecting you to deliver? So you want this to be nice and programmed. I know if I do this, I come down with the answer. That's very good, except for one real big problem here. You are a class of managers. And the tough part with being in a managerial role, darn it all, we want you to think. So part of this is sometimes we put something out there and we want you to look at it and say, gee, do I save this or don't I? And have to make a judgment call. And for all you know, the 10 marks the question's worth is all about how did your judgment go? What decision process did you go through? Not even did you get the answer right, but just simply what the thought process was. That you can't learn by rote. So here's a bit of a tip, since this is a simple thing here. Whenever you see a word like general factory overhead, like literally the word general, that's a tip-off to you. You're probably not saving the cost. I'll explain why in a second. Same thing with down here. Now, why am I saying that? Here's what's happened in this company. First off, let's look at all these other expenses just for a second. We have a manager running the watch department. Okay, that's the line manager here that's getting paid $90,000 to run the production. We depreciate equipment here, fine. We advertise the product, fine. We rent factory space, fine. So what are these two things? Well, what they are is you've got the company president, you've got the accounting department, you've got the human resources department. You know, all these costs of running the company. And let's think about this from a human resource department. You got a human resource department there that's managing all the workforce for all the product lines of this company. Make sense? Yeah. Including the watches. We get rid of this watch department. Did we substantially change the job of the HR department?
No.
Probably not. Now, maybe a bit. We don't know how many employees we have here, right? But the HR department is still going to exist after we wind up this division. Maybe we got one person removed out of HR, depending, but largely it's going to stay the same. So what happens? Here's what happens here before this whole decision started. They took all of this general overhead for the HR department, the accounting department, the security guards, the whole bit. And they basically said, we got all this cost, we are selling 10 products, of which the digital watches is one. Okay? We are going to split that cost up amongst all 10 products. Follow me? Mm-hmm. Sound good? Mm-hmm. So this is what accountants call an allocation. A 1/10 or whatever the heck it is of the cost was allocated to this department. Point is, we stop this, something's got to pay these two bills. We won't save these costs in this case. Got to read the fine print. Okay? So that's important to note here, because somebody looks at this and say, we could save $100,000 if we get rid of digital watches. But can we? Because I'm seeing 60 and 30 right there that I'm not saving. So just be careful, be cautious here. We're not suddenly saving all this. So what else might we not save? Well, we've got equipment here. Is this equipment used elsewhere in the company? Like, are they going to shuffle it to some other department? Okay, if they do, we're not getting rid of it. We're still going to have a $50,000 cost. It's just being moved over to some other department. We don't know. They haven't commented, but I'm just saying, if they sell it and get rid of it, okay, then it is something we're going to save. Mm-hmm. What about the rent of the factory space?
No.
You see where I'm going here, right? Like if this room was our factory, and in this corner over here we're making the digital watches, we shut down the digital watches while we're still paying the rent. Yeah. So are they able to take advantage of that space with another product? Mm-hmm. If so, okay, good, but we're not saving that then either. If we can bring a whole new different product line instead of this, well, then maybe it is part of the decision, because that hasn't, they only talk about getting rid of this. They didn't say we're bringing something else in. But if they were bringing in something else, that might change this. So these are prudent questions you would ask as a manager, before you make a decision. What's happening with all these things? Okay, so we know about the two general expenses as well. Look at this. Now we came up with the equipment to make this stuff. It has no resale value or alternative use. So that's a fancy way of saying in this that, what was that? Anyway, whatever. In the grand scheme of things in here, we're not going to be able to save the value here. And now it's going to say, do we get rid of this? So now we're going to go through and say, how much of this stuff did we save? Don't look up here. We will save the line manager. They're gone. Okay, hope that's not one of you. We're going to save the advertising. We're no longer advertising watches. And in this case, they figure they can save the factory space. When I did the comment about are we going to save it, it's one of those things we are going to ask, but in here they didn't say otherwise. They're assuming that it can't be saved. We could do something else with the space, transfer that cost to some other profit line, or get rid of the rent. Like when we're saying we could save the rent, maybe it is a portion that our lease would be adjusted and that space would be rented out to somebody else. Okay. So they can save $260,000 here. So common mistake number one that a student will do on the question, you will get this part right. Good for you. And you will say, yes, we should get rid of watches because we will save $260,000. You are correct, we will save $260,000. Okay? But, and half of you will do this, well, maybe a third of you, will do this on the midterm. You will forget that we also lose that $300,000 contribution. So yes, we save $260,000, but we lose $300. I'm $40,000 worse off than what I would have been if I kept doing digital watches at $100,000 loss. So to be clear, if we ditch digital watches, you're not going to save $100,000. You're going to be $40,000 worse off than you were before. Now they didn't show us what the whole profit was for the company, but we do have some exercises where they do in the book. And you'll see something where I think there's a really good one coming up there where we've got like a store that sells linens and all kinds of other stuff. That might be the exercise that's in there, where it looks like, yes, let's get rid of this underperforming department, but when you do so, you'll actually see that the whole company gets slammed. The company that wasn't performing well, or the division that wasn't performing well, was really, because it was contributing cash to it, was actually stabilizing a lot of the operation. So it's beyond the scope of this course. But usually if you've got this kind of stuff happening, not this, but that general overhead allocation and this, that, and the other thing, if those are usually affecting decisions here, it begins to raise a bit of a question of should they have been allocated that way in the first place. So this is an accounting major's thing now, is if you're doing stuff like this that's screwing up your measurement of like how well a department's performing, it probably means you shouldn't have been adding those costs in there to start with. If those are common costs that you can't separate, why are you putting 1/10 of it towards every department? You're better off saying, here's how much money I made from watches by all the costs that relate to only doing the watches, and the same thing with the next department and the next department, and then you say, now is all of that covering these common costs? So that's the unspoken thing here, that those costs, the general overhead and whatever, probably should not have been allocated in here, or they should have done the analysis this way. It's painting an inaccurate picture of how the departments really contributed. Anyway, that is your basically going to be your second type of decision. If you're doing the full out detailed comparative differential analysis approach, it would look like this. So I want to emphasize with doing it, if you do this right, you will always get the answer right. Also takes forever to write, but you will get the answer correct all the time. Assuming you don't make any mistake down here, of course. Nothing wrong with just jumping to what are the things that changed. Like that, and that, and coming up with the bottom line. But you run the risk of missing something. So a couple things which I will say. I doubt, well, do you have time to do this on the exam? Yes. If you know what you're doing and you don't have to sit and think about it. Okay, so if you know what you're doing, boom, 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 and jumping across, you will have time. You will definitely have time to do the shortcut version. In both cases, make sure you show your calculations. And there's nothing wrong also with sort of saying why you included or excluded something too. Remember I said I'm trying to evaluate a bit about how you're thinking. So there's a few things in here they didn't comment on. They didn't really say, could we save the rent? Okay, they actually are assuming we can. But they didn't say if you could. And for all you know, if this was an exam question, I was putting that there to test you to see, would you challenge this? Okay, maybe just because I didn't say anything about it doesn't mean you shouldn't say, hey, wait a minute, I think we would save it. So there's nothing wrong with writing just a little assumption in your test book, let's say, you know, I think we will save the factory expense because, or I don't think we will save the factory expense because, depending how you've done it. And I might find a couple of things. Part marks might be in the offing, like in other words, you can earn marks, not full marks necessarily, but in some cases you might get a full mark. Because even if my marking key, because I'm always right, I'm the guy setting the exam, remember, my marking key says, yes, we're going to save this. You came up with a reason of why you were thinking, no, we're not going to save it, and it's compelling. I might go, good. You know, I'm going to have to override my marking key in your case and give you some marks for this because you made a compelling argument about why you wouldn't have included this in your analysis. Or why you would, you know, either way.
In a separate part, I want to give an explanation why I'm giving this leg difference, right?
It wouldn't actually be that different other than...
Can I write it as this is like depreciation and then tracking, why I'm doing this? Otherwise I want to write it down and I want to explain.
Yes.
I want to write it down.
Yes. When in doubt, write it down. With this course, not writing something down is your worst enemy. You know, like write down, you don't have to write a big book about it, but write down why you're doing something. And I mean, you don't have to do it with every line, you know, everything. Like this stuff I said is almost always going to be saved, so you don't need to describe it. But something here that's possibly contentious could go either way, and if the question's not clarifying it, nothing wrong with saying what your thoughts are. That very well might be what I'm testing you on for part of the mark of the question.
So your general and depreciation and general admission is not here. In the question it says that general factory and general administration doesn't change; it's remaining the same. How could I explain that in the term? Like if as per the question, these two is not changing. Like I want to explain that.
Yeah, those are usually hints at things that won't change.
Yeah, it's not changed.
Yeah.
So how could I explain it? How I want to explain it now.
I see how you're wanting to say it.
Yeah.
You could just sort of say, this sounds like it's overall overhead that applies to the entire operation and would not be saved. That's all you have to say.
So remaining things I want to say that these things are have to be saved.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
In this case, we can exclude this rent because we are offering only one product, like digital watch, right?
Yes.
But what if we are offering multiple products like digital watch, laptops, and in that case we are only dropping that one segment?
That's right.
Then we cannot exclude that rent, right?
That's
because
right.
the other products will be there.
Yeah.
We will still be offering those products.
Yeah, if I heard you right, if you were lining up all the segments in the row, like here's this segment, that segment, that segment, that segment, when you see this general overhead or any other thing, it becomes brutally obvious at the time. Like right now, it's not obvious, but when you see it across a set of segmented income statement, you would suddenly, you would be looking at this and saying, okay, wait a minute, what is this? And when you ask, people around you, oh, that's the accounting department, the HR department, whatever, you'd be sort of saying, hey, wait a minute, like it would be brutally obvious that those were common costs.
Actually, I mean to say that we can exclude the range for these cases because we are only dropping the digital watches
That's
and we
right.
are only offering that only.
Yeah.
But what if we have so many products to other products to offer?
Yeah.
In let's say for example, if there is a company who offers watches and laptops and other materials.
Yeah.
So in that case, we plan to drop that digital watches revenues and stop offering that digital watch. And the space will be still there. No? We will be using that space as well. So in that
right.
case, we cannot exclude that brand
Well,
for dropping.
yeah, like what I'm getting at was when you had all the music, all the different products.
Yeah.
What would be happening? When I was saying the stuff would be brutal, including the rent and all this, it would be asking the question of if I got rid of this, what's taking the vacuum? And if something else is coming in there, the real question is did I save 70,000 or not? And the answer would be no.
Yeah.
If something else, if one of the other 9 products was just saying I'm using this space now, have I really saved anything? No. Actually, in some ways, I disagree with the solution. I have a feeling that there's more of a compelling case to say that rent wouldn't be saved. The only way I would say it would is if we were renting like a garage for just doing this product, and then we stopped doing it, so now we're letting go that particular little building, then you would save it. But the question really didn't tell us either way.
So it
You
should be
couldn't go
mentioned in
on
the
either way.
question, right? If you are not saving the rent, it should be mentioned in the question.
Exactly. So I think they should have told you something here on it, because if it was a piece of the factory, we're not saving it. If it was its own little separate space being rented separately, then yes, we probably are saving it. So the question should have given you more of a hint on that.
So in exam, they will definitely tell, right?
Yes.
That if it is,
Yeah, so let's just say on the exam, you're probably getting more of a hit from me. There might be 1 or 2 where I'm not giving you a hint because I want to test what you think, but it'll be something that's far more obvious if I do that. Like you'd be going, of course we do, like for example, advertising, of course we're saving the advertising. I don't have to tell you that. If this advertising was only about the wristwatch or digital watches here, then of course we're saving it. So if I'm doing something that's getting you thinking like that, I'm probably gonna make it a little more obvious. That rent could have gone either way. Okay. So, if you're looking at the slide decks, which are all uploaded now for you, by the way, I did backfill all the way to chapter 2 for stuff. I didn't put the chapter 1 stuff up, I probably should. But you've got what the slide decks for Learning Outcome 2, you've got the Learning Outcome 3 slide deck up there, and you've got both pieces of Learning Outcome 4 now up there. This is going through that general overhead thing. That's what this is all about, the allocated fixed cost. This is the trap to look for in this type of decision. It's the one that's going to torpedo your answer. What are the costs that I can't save? Okay, so I think we've got brief exercise 93. exercise 9.3, not brief exercise.
No, we finished only exercise 9,
Okay.
not brief exercise.
Okay.
This is enough. Sorry.
Just this one, maybe I'll make sure I do exercise 9.3, whatever, 2 that's got it. This one's a really good one to prove the point. Did you do this one with gradient cost?
No,
You didn't, right, you just did the.
brief exercise we done. We
Okay.
done. 9.3 brief we done. Like hardware and yeah, we finished it.
Okay, so you did do it?
Yeah, we done.
Okay, so the highlight on this one, think of it. Normally would work through it again, but I think you've seen parts, so I'm just cut. Let's just go back to the question for a second. Okay. So, this is the one where I was saying, here's this hardware department making 700,000 for their stuff. They had a linens division that was losing 200,000. But I usually said the manager of the hardware department has really got it in for the manager of the linens department, because it was basically, my efforts here are supporting you, ungrateful SOB, I'm doing all the work here to subsidize your losses. But when you read into the rest of the question, when they talked about it here, they said basically here that $240,000 of the fixed expenses are being charged, to linen are sunk costs, or basically costs that will continue regardless of whether we have a linens department or not. So what they're saying here is $240,000 of this $800,000 here is not going to be saved if we get rid of the linen department. They also went on to say that we're making money out of hardware because we have the linens department. Like, because people are buying linens, they then buy stuff in hardware. So if we don't have linens, we will see a 20% decrease in the sales of the hardware department. So essentially, in all of this, what would happen if we got rid of linens? So there's the official answer for this one coming up here. We would lose $600,000 of contribution. The amount of, the sales less variable cost, $600,000 left. We would lose 20% of sales from the hardware department. We would save $560,000 of that $800,000. We would still have to be paying the $240,000. And at the end of the day, that means we're going to lose $460,000 of profit in the company. So $600,000 of contribution lost, 20% of the sales lost, and only a savings of $560,000 on the fixed expenses. So to put that all together, remember the bottom line here was 500. So we get rid of linens, thinking we're saving $200,000. This is going to go from 500,000 to 40,000. If you get rid of the linens department. So why would that happen? And the answer is, this company really had a whole pile of fixed costs. Yes, some fixed costs were added from here. But what was happening here is this 600,000 is covering a good part of it's paying its own way for the fixed costs that were allocated literally to it. Not this, like, meaning the stuff we can save if they get rid of it. It's just what it isn't doing is covering all of that 240. It's only covering a bit of it. Frankly, it's only covering 40,000 of it. So essentially what's happening in this is, yes, you're seeing that, but it's partially covering this. If you get rid of it, then you have nothing covering that. And so you suddenly will see the overall profit plummet. And again, I would say this is a case of they shouldn't be allocating the costs this way, because it's leading to this type of decision. But, sometimes there's no right answer to how you should do it, but when you're going to talk about getting rid of it, then you can analyze and say, what will the impact be? Okay, this is not the hardest type of decision you could get, but it's getting there. Because there's little bits of fine points or so in it. Okay. Be careful. I don't want to say that just because it looks like this is obvious, let's get rid of it, that doesn't end up being the correct answer. But be skeptical in this course. If something looks like an obvious thing, it probably means it isn't. So, if you're saying, yes, we should get rid of it, I'm probably playing head games on you. Okay, how are we doing on time? Well, 2 minutes to go, we're not gonna get into anything further. Alrighty, so, while we wait to hear what's happening with our missing hour this week, we'll see if that puts in. I will, give you a few other exercises to try here for this. There's not a ton in the book, but I will give a few extra ones. I could start quoting numbers and you can start writing, but probably what's gonna be better is I post them in Brightspace and then you got it in writing somewhere. So stay tuned or whatever in there, I'll get something uploaded. Tonight, by the way, my major homework is setting your final exam. So I'm doing it for the other groups that are writing this week, but my major task right now is finalizing the final exam. So I've got that on the mind and whatever here right now. Then we get around to getting you ready your midterm at some point when things are ready. Any questions or so for the moment? We good? Yeah. All right. So I believe, once we get through those exercises, any of the remaining exercises or so, we pretty much caught you up to where Greg last left you, right? Yes? So I'm thinking if we go on to the next stuff here, the make or buy decision, you haven't seen that one yet, right?
No.
Okay. So next class, if you're wanting to read ahead, some students actually do that, we'll be doing the next one, the third type, which is the make or buy decision. And that one's really powerful to you as a manager, because that's the one that's debating about, do I subcontract something, do I make it in-house, how do I deal with scarce resources of it. Okay, so that's it for today. And stay tuned, I'll give you some homework or so there to look at, a question or two or three, probably something that you've looked at already. And otherwise, we'll look at make buy at least on Friday, if not sooner. Once I find out what I'm scheduling this in. Okay, that's it. Have a good rest of your day. Thank you for your contributions, everyone.